We are going to end catch and release. We catch them? Oh, go ahead. We catch them? Go ahead. Under my administration, anyone who illegally crosses the border will be detained until they are removed out of our country and back to the country from which they came.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The U.S. bishops and Pope Francis have each voiced their support for very generous immigration policies in the U.S. and around the world. How should Catholics in the pews view this issue in the coming election? And can Catholics differ from the bishops and the Pope even when it comes to immigration? Joining me now to discuss the moral dimensions of immigration policy is the Director of International Migration Policy at the Center for Migration Studies, former USCCB Director of Migration Policy, Kevin Appleby. And next to him, former White House advisor to President George W. Bush, currently the editor of the Christian Review. Please welcome Dale Hudson. Thank you both for being here.
Good to be here.
I want to start with what is the Catholic teaching vis-a-vis immigration? What does the Church require of Catholics going to the polls?
Well, it's a balanced approach. First, we should welcome the stranger. That's the teaching, that we should respect human dignity, respect human rights. But there's a second part to it, is that the sovereign does have a right to control its borders, so enforcement is also important. The bishops have come out with a plan that would support bringing people out of the shadows, including keeping the border enforced, but to bring people out of the shadows so they can contribute, so their families can be kept together.
A path to legalization.
A path to citizenship is what the bishops support. Yeah.
Okay. Deal?
I only would add that there's a fundamental ambiguity at the heart of how the bishops are teaching immigration, and that is, how do you relate the right, as they recognize, of a country to control its borders, to have border integrity, with the call that the Church makes to all of us to recognize those really in need, those really in distress, those who really need to leave their country and come into ours to find the basic goods of life which they lack in the country of their origin. That's a prudential matter. It's very ambiguous. You have to make that choice person by person, family by family. And the answer is not just to open the borders and let anybody come across.
So the question here is really, it's within the government's purview. It's really the government's prudential judgment.
Perhaps.
Based person to person, right?
Right, but popes have taught that the presumption is that nations, especially wealthy nations, should try to accommodate immigrants as much as possible. And Pope Francis has echoed that. He's also decried the globalization of indifference that we've seen around the world to refugees and other migrants. So the presumption is not the right to control the border. The presumption is you should try to accommodate people in need to the degree possible that you can. And in the United States situation, there would be a higher responsibility in that regard.
I'd say the United States has done that and more. We've got 11 million undocumented, or I'll call them illegal immigrants here, and they haven't been arrested and they haven't been sent back to their country. So we have been generous, more than generous. We've even relaxed the rule of law to the point where we don't even enforce our own laws on immigration.
Is there an obligation to the rule of law in the Catholic?
Well, according to the Catechism said that every human person needs to be subject to civil authority. And that civil authority's first job is to protect the lives and safety of its citizens and to enforce its laws.
Yeah, and the Catechism
we're not doing that.
Does call on people coming to a country to respect those laws, which I imagine would include immigration law.
That's true. But laws can be changed, and laws need to reflect respect for human rights and human dignity. And I think that's what the bishops are saying here, that our law does not really do that.
What about Mr. Trump's idea, hazarded at the top of the show there, that if someone's here illegally, they have to be sent back to their country of origin, then they can get in line with everybody else to apply for citizenship?
Well, I mean, Mr. Trump doubled down on his enforcement-only policy. I mean, frankly, what he's doing is creating a little police state with all the proposals together, which will cost billions and billions of dollars, and it still won't solve the problem. What we need to do is look at the long stayers. 70% of undocumented immigrants have been here 10 years or longer in this country. Should we all deport them? Are they contributing? The other side of the equation is that these people are contributing. They have families, they work in jobs, they do pay taxes, they do pay Social Security. So we need to be honest about, are they contributing and should we deport them? Or are they helping our country? That's a question that needs to be considered.
Hudson.
First of all, to enforce the law as it is not to create a police state. So I disagree with Kevin on that. And I think that I disagree with the idea of sending everybody back, all 11 million, to their country of origin. I think that's impractical.
Yeah, well, there's probably more than 11 billion.
It may be right
in
principle, but in practice, it just wouldn't work. I think there should be put in place a demanding process of legalization for undocumented immigrants in this country. I do agree with Mr. Trump that those who are felons, proven criminals, or taking in part in some kind of the drug trade or sex trafficking, they should be sent back immediately.
I want to place.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I don't think the bishops would disagree with that either. Anyone's a threat who's a major felon, certainly.
I want to say one thing. Yeah. When the bishops came out with their first pastoral letter in the year 2000, they also released a video. The video followed a family of immigrants from Mexico who snuck across the border. And the film glorified their breaking the law and coming into this country. They were seen as martyrs. They were seen as doing the right thing. I think that's a fundamental mistake for our church to be glorifying those who break the law.
You want to react?
Well, I'm not sure with the video he's talking about, but I think what the bishops are trying to say is that people are in desperate situations. They're either fleeing gangs or fleeing conflict, or they just want a better life. And they're probably trying to humanize the situation in that video because these are human beings just like the rest of us, and they want what's best for their children.
Shouldn't part of the solution being, and it seems to my eye, the church is so uniquely positioned to do this, shouldn't part of the solution be in this case of Mexico, let's just take Mexico and the United States. The United States bishops helping the Mexican bishops to help increase the safety, security, prosperity of the people in Mexico as well as of the United States. So that's
what the church teaches. It says the first remedy to this kind of immigration is to go inside the country and help them create an economic situation that people won't want to flee their country. That's the first remedy, not to open the borders of the country next door.
Yeah, to evacuate the country. The best and brightest of Mexico are leaving. You need them there to keep the society together.
The church would agree with that. Addressing the root causes of migration is the church's answer to a border wall. That's the only way you're going to solve this problem over the long term. A border wall won't solve it over the long term. You have to develop those countries so people don't have to migrate.
I like the idea of a wall, but not a wall all the way across the border. I think when you look at the wall.
How do you build a wall over the Rio Grande?
No, a wall down south of San Diego has done a great job for decades in stemming illegal immigrants there. You have walls at El Paso. We talked about that earlier. And of course, walls have been built all over the world for millennia to help keep a nation's safety and security in the face of potential harm. So there's nothing wrong with a wall per se. It's how the wall is actually built and where it is built.
But we've seen in history walls go up and walls come down. And that would be the same with this wall.
And that's a good thing. And I hope one day to see the wall on the West Bank of Israel and Palestine to come down too.
Now, Hillary Clinton has argued for comprehensive immigration reform from the beginning of her campaign. Listen to this.
I will fight for comprehensive immigration reform and a path to citizenship for you and for your families across our country. I will fight to stop partisan attacks on the executive actions that would put dreamers, including those with us today, at risk of deportation. And if Congress continues to refuse to act as president, I would do everything possible under the law to go even further.
Hillary Clinton's approach here seems to be as wide an immigration policy as possible, and not only to allow the dreamers, the people who want to stay here, the young people stay here, but to also keep the door open to anyone wanting to come in from Mexico or anywhere else, all of South Central America and the world. Is that kind of immigration policy possible in this age of small terrorist acts that we see afflicting the entire country and all of Western Europe?
I'm not sure that's what she's saying, but what she is saying is that we've got 11 million people here. We've had this problem for years, and we need to put them on a path of citizenship. And let me say what that is, because Catholics support it. It's not an automatic citizenship. You have to earn this. You have to learn English. You have to work. You have to pay your taxes. And you have to get in the back of the line. And that's something that's really hard to do over a 10-year period. Wouldn't we want these people who go through that to be citizens if they're that committed? That's what path to citizenship is.
Deal.
If it turns out that way, I'm in full agreement with it, but I doubt very much under a Clinton administration would actually turn out that way. In fact, I think she's avoiding the problem altogether. The problem is at the border. And there's a reason why 30,000 border guards have joined together to endorse Donald Trump. They deal with this every day. They see the suffering, not just the suffering of those who are coming over, but what happens when they're here, the kind of situation they're put in. And they don't immediately fall in the arms of their family and friends. You know, many of them wander around the United States. Many of them get picked up for sex trafficking and get involved in drugs. I would say the border.
I've also seen the poor dead people who've come across as well, who were trafficked by these coyotes, and then they're dropped in the desert somewhere.
So we need a policy that looks that issue in the face, rather than just letting it go on and on and on.
Can I just
Go
respond
ahead.
to that?
Sure, sure.
The problem actually is not at the border, because illegal immigration across the border is at its lowest level since 1972. The problem is in the workplace, and the fact that businesses are able to hire undocumented without any recrimination at all. And it's a sort of a nod, wink, wink system. You know, if everything's working, that's fine. If it's broke, don't fix it.
Right.
And that's where it is. What the bishops are saying, let people come in legally. Let's make a legal system, not an underground system, which is what we have now.
In 1972, we didn't have worldwide terrorism. And illegal immigration may be down. But we have a situation now in which we have to be extra vigilant to the fact of terrorists using our leniency against us to send in all kinds of terrorists, Islamic and otherwise, which we will soon see the evidence of, sorry to say.
Donald Trump, in his speech the other night, mentioned the focus that we perhaps are not focused on the proper thing in his estimation. Here's what he had to say.
Anyone who tells you that the core issue is the needs of those living here illegally has simply spent too much time in Washington. To all the politicians, donors, and special interests, hear these words from me and all of you today. There is only one core issue in the immigration debate, and that issue is the well-being of the American people.
Reaction?
There's two sides of that story. I mean, he's assuming that anyone who's an immigrant who's working is automatically taking a job from an American worker, and that's not true. Actually, immigrant workers complement the American workforce, because the American workforce is much more trained, much more educated. Immigrants usually take the bottom rung of jobs, working in the fields, in restaurants. They may compete certainly against high school dropouts here, but by and large, they're not taking jobs from people. They're actually contributing to the economy, and if we lost all of them, the economy would slow down. So that's sort of a myth that he's touting.
I don't think Donald Trump is really looking at the situation that way. I would imagine he agrees with what you just said. I think he's looking at the rule of law. I think he's looking at the issue of, are we going to be a nation that controls its borders, that has a regulated and orderly and lawful flow of immigrants into our nation, rather than the chaos we have right now. I think he looks at the common good of this nation, not in terms of keeping the immigrants out, but of regulating their process of coming in.
Well, But his only proposals have been to getting rid of them. He has no proposal for bringing them in, other than those who meet an ideological test. And let me...
What ideological?
He's proposed an ideological test for
The
Muslims
extreme
and
vetting.
others.
He talked
The
about
vetting.
extreme vetting for refugees coming
Right.
in,
And
he's
immigrants, and
well, and he's proposing.
But Catholic social teaching itself has
Well-
certain criteria that are that they themselves put forward for allowing people to cross borders into other nations.
Which would be what?
They have to be people who are fit to be citizens. They have to be people whose intentions are to become citizens of the other country. And they have to be of genuine need.
I don't know if it gets that specific, but Mr. Trump has a larger problem here that I want to point out. And it goes to our Catholic history. We're an immigrant church, okay? So when he comes out and he says, we're going to ban all Muslims, or we're going to test people, that cuts close to the bone for many Catholics, because we went through that history in the 19th century with the Know-Nothing parties. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there. You know, when nuns wore habits back then, that was taken as a threat. You know, and churches were attacked. So we have a similar history there. And it's sort of like, if this guy is going to ban Muslims, who's next? You know, that's in people's minds.
Kevin, Catholic sensibilities aren't Catholic teaching. And to turn off a third-generation Irish immigrant, Irish Catholic in America, or a third-generation Italian, is bad politics, but it's not against the teaching of the church. And I think Donald Trump has made a mistake in the way he's talked about Muslims and Mexicans. And I think he went to Mexico precisely to try to correct that. It was to me, quite an achievement for him to go down and show himself to the Mexican president and to the Mexican people and say, look, I'm here to try to work things out.
One other quick.
Go ahead quickly before
Trump
I run
made
out
a
of
big
time.
mistake. He played the anti-Catholic card right before the South Carolina primary when he tangled with the Pope. Pope Francis.
Well, the Pope tangled with him.
Well, he started it. Trump started it.
Yeah.
Pope responded.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what we might all think about Pope Francis and they're different, he's popular in America. That was a mistake, and people remember that he challenged our Pope and our church, and that is something that people take to heart in this country. So I think that's something he's going to have a hard time overcoming.
Yeah. I want to shift for a moment onto the Syrian refugees, particularly the Syrian refugees. Hillary Clinton has asked for an expanded acceptance of these refugees. 10,000 have already come. She would like to see that number tripled. Donald Trump is saying, no, we have to freeze any immigration from these hot spots where potential terrorists could derive. A smart move or discriminatory?
I would say discriminatory only because we have such vetting already in place for Syrian refugees. They go through more screening than any arrival to this country.
And they should.
And they're very well screened. The 10,000 have been waiting for 2 years to come to the U.S. So there are systems in place to vet these refugees, and they are themselves fleeing terror.
So why aren't we seeing more of the Christian refugees who are the people caught between both camps here?
And in fact, the Bishops' Conference has been given $91 million by the federal government to help resettle these refugees in the United States, when the Obama administration's policy has been to bring only Muslims whose lives have been
Well, the church has never discriminated over who they help.
No, but why shut out the Christians?
Yeah, well, but that's a policy question for the Obama administration.
But why then would the U.S. bishops accept $91 million to do a job that rests upon a discriminatory policy decision?
Kevin, you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with Mr. Hudson that Christians should be part of the mix, certainly.
Yeah.
But
given priority.
Well, yeah, there are religious minorities that are being persecuted.
Right.
Don't disagree with that. And there have been bishops who said that. One of the issues there is, do we want to resettle Christians out of their native communities? And the Holy See has had different opinions on that, because you don't want to take those Christian communities away and them have no presence.
Doesn't that go
in the
for
Middle
Muslims
East.
as well?
But certainly the church has advocated for Christians as well, and not just for Muslims. And, you know, again, it's the right policy not to discriminate suffering refugee just because they're a Muslim.
I wish the bishop had said, look, before we can do this job for you that you want to pay us to do, we want to make sure that Christians are not being discriminated against.
Do you think this immigration issue is front and center this time? It's obviously a big one for Donald Trump. It has driven his candidacy. Is it going to be determinative at the end of the day come November? Kevin.
You know, I think it will be in the mix, but I don't think it'll be the central issue. I don't think it drives everyone's final vote. I think there are other issues that are involved. I think with the Latino voters, it will certainly make a difference, and with some Catholic voters as well. But I don't think it will be the central issue that determines the election.
Deal Hudson.
It's going to color the whole election, therefore it's going to have influence. But what bothers me is you've got Catholics out there who say, I won't vote for Donald Trump because of his immigration policy, but never mention the fact of Hillary Clinton's total embrace of abortion on demand. And they'll go vote for her, not raising that question of abortion, whereas they'll raise the question of immigration with Donald Trump.
I agree. It's a terrible year for Catholics in that regard.
Yeah, well, and before I let you all go, I asked Mercedes Schlapp this earlier. Donald Trump has a deficit among Catholics, a big one, 25% down, points down. That's major. You know this deal, having dealt in this arena with George W. Bush. How detrimental is this to his possible victory?
Hugely detrimental. But first of all, I think that poll is extreme. I think it's more like 10 to 12 points down. But I think that any candidate who has 5% plus in the Catholic column is going to win the presidency.
Kevin?
There's a reason Tim Kaine was elected vice president. A lot of good reasons from the Hillary Clinton campaign, but the big reason was because he was a white male Catholic. Because they know that the Catholic vote is going to be decisive in this election. It will probably make the difference. There are Catholics in major swing states, and if you don't win the Catholic vote, you're not going to win the presidency.
Okay, we will leave it there. Thank you, Kevin Appleby, Deal Hudson. And look, to follow the Center for Migration Studies and Kevin Appleby, you can go to cmsny.org, and you can read Deal Hudson's columns on culture, politics, faith at thechristianreview.com.